All right, we're about halfway through the Big Ten season, so I thought, why not reach out to Isaac Trotter, who's kind enough to give us some of his time and talk about Big Ten hoops. Already halfway there, man. How you feeling about it?
Man, it's a gauntlet right now. We're kind of in the dog days of the season, right? Just a lot of season left, but I feel like we know a lot about these teams, but there's still a lot of questions. And this is the time of the year where things start to get weird. I have a feeling that teams are going to start losing some games. It's a long stretch. Teams start looking ahead to March, but every game is important. And we know in the Big Ten, especially in a conference title chase, it's like you never know what game's going to really end up mattering a whole lot in a couple weeks.
Yeah, this is the marathon part of it. I remember was it 2022 when Illinois won a share of the Big Ten championship? Like it didn't look like they had much of a chance to win it about halfway through the season. They lost back to back to Purdue and Maryland. They lost 3 games in 5 days there. And then all of a sudden, a couple of losses for some other teams opens up some things. So obviously a really, really long way to go. But let's talk about this. Terrence Shannon's back on the court for Illinois. Hasn't quite looked like Terrence Shannon quite yet. But what are your thoughts on his return to the court and what we've seen out of this team since he has come back?
Yeah, I think when he first came back, I looked at some of the numbers, and they were 15 points per 100 possessions better defensively with Shannon on the floor. So I just kind of automatically jumped to the assumption, hey, this defense is going to start kind of getting back to what we thought. And it really hasn't been there. It feels like there's this reintegration process. That's the big fun word that Brad Underwood likes to use. But it has looked like that. It looks like a team really out of sync. They don't necessarily look like they're humming on everything. But to be honest, Illinois' situation is different, but they're kind of in the same boat as a lot of teams throughout the country, especially during the time with the 2-time waivers. We've had a lot of different teams have guys get just randomly tossed into your rotation, and you got to figure it out. So Illinois is far from alone with that constantly, right? Like here's an Illinois comp, Southern Miss gets Andre Curbelo, middle of the year, kind of got to throw him in and figure it out how this is going to happen. So I think that Illinois is in starting to figure out what they need to be. And I just feel like mentally Terrence looks like he's thinking instead of playing. We've seen a lot of that like indecisiveness of when I want to drive the basketball or when I want to just shoot it. And it feels like he's still trying to figure out exactly what he wants to do on a possession by possession basis. But I still think overall they're a much better defensive team when he's on the floor, if he can start defending at his level. And I think part of the equation with this team is that like we thought it'd be defense first leading to offense. It feels a little bit backwards right now. It feels like offense first and defense lagging behind. But I do think that Water's going to find its level and Illinois is going to get back to playing at a better defensively because I think Shannon is one of the better wing defenders in this league.
Looking at the month of January, they're 5-3. One of those losses is at Purdue without Terrence Shannon. You made a comeback, had a chance late in that game. I don't know if you ever really were threatening them, but you at least made a run at the end of the game. Most teams are going to lose at Purdue. Everyone's losing at Northwestern besides Chicago State, and that was a pretty epic Northwestern performance. But you do look at that sample size, they're 8th in the country in adjusted offensive efficiency, 69th in defense, which actually is an improvement from where they were a couple of games ago. But do you think there are any adjustments Brad Underwood needs to make defensively? Because some of these talented guards are getting the best of them. I mean, Jameer Young and Boo Buie do it to most teams, but some of these big guys are kind of cooking a little bit going one-on-one. So do you see any adjustments Brad Underwood needs to make?
We've talked a lot about the plan, right? Like Illinois does a really good job of taking away shots at the rim, taking away threes, and living in the mid-range. And they're still doing that for the most part. So I think the process is okay. Yeah. But I have not liked some of the execution lately. I think some of those concerns about defending the basketball without Sincere Harris have started to come into play. And I think it's execution, honestly, more than it is like this like scheme needs to get changed. Like maybe you add a little bit more maybe you add a few more traps. Maybe you shake things up a little bit more with your post defense work. Maybe you change a few things with your ball screen coverages at times. But for the most part, I think their process is still sound, but they're just letting teams get way too comfortable, way too easy. Like the straight line drives that Terrence Shannon's been giving up, Justin Harmon's been giving up, even Ty Rodgers at times when he's getting hit on screens or taking weird angles to get around screens are a little bit concerning to me. I joked, I thought Justin Harmon had a concussion because I felt like he got hit by every single screen that Northwestern set for him. Like he got hit every time, and Trent Frazier never got hit by those screens. Andre Curbelo able to get skinny and get through those screens. You see like Houston, Jamal Shed never gets hit by those screens. And so Illinois is getting hit by those screens a lot right now. And so that's a question mark. Like, that's execution. That's understanding the scouting report and getting to it. So I don't want to, we've talked about this. Hey, Illinois' process is good. That process still hasn't really changed. They're still forcing some of those tough shots. They're still taking away shots at the rim. They're still trying to limit threes. But like, they have got to get back to the point where, like, as a basketball community, we always talk about like the process and results. Like, I feel like the results right now aren't good. So then we're going, oh, this process needs to change, when really it needs to be more executing our process a little bit better.
I totally agree with you, because you look at some of these numbers during conference play, they're allowing the fewest amount of 3-point field goal attempts per field goal attempt that the teams are doing. And they're third in 2-point percentage defense. So like, those things scream that they're doing pretty well at these things. But I agree with you. I just think you need to win your battles a little bit more. I do think every once in a while, like, switching things up, surprising a team. It does feel like Brad Underwood's married to this every possession of every game, which over a long sample size might work out for him. But just every once in a while, maybe throw a post trap, maybe go a little bit of pressure, and just to switch things up a little bit more often. But I do think it's got to be a pride thing. I think it's got to be a focus thing. And this team seems so dialed in through that Missouri game, right? Through even Northwestern without Terrence Shannon defensively. I just haven't seen quite that intensity and bite defensively lately.
Yeah, that's a great word, the bite, right? Like, just like, can you feel them? And this personnel, I thought that Illinois might try to tap into, turning teams over a little bit more, just because they're so fast and they have a lot of size, positional size. So far, that hasn't really been the case. Now, Coleman Hawkins is trying his best to individually change that turnover rate with all of his steals that he's been racking up. But I do think that, like, you can start to become a little bit more confrontational. But again, when you have positional size and you want to play a bunch of 6'6" dudes, it's not that surprising that those elite guards are able to kind of get in and out of your thing. Like, that's where you thought that Sincere Harris was going to be a big part of this team. And now, if he's not going to play, that's where I think Justin Harmon has to take the onus on himself. Like, that's my job. Like, and he has to tap into that again, because I felt like at times it feels like he vacillates between like being super dialed in on the scouting report, and then other times he just isn't. And so that's where for me, it's like, if you're going to be a big part of this rotation, or if you're Dre Gibbs Lawhorn and you're like, hey, I'm trying to work my way into this rotation, being that point guard stopper, that feels like a job that no one has really embraced so far yet right now. And that feels like your path to minutes. And if you can win that point guard stopper role, you're probably going to get on the floor.
I know we've covered this a long time. The way for freshmen to get on the court, defend and rebound. That's a good way to do it. I think for Terrence Shannon, that needs to be the simple focus right now. Like, I know you're trying to get into a rhythm offensively. You want to be Terrence Shannon All-American again. The best way for him to get easy buckets and get confidence is to get in transition, and that's to get stops. It's to get rebounds so he can push it in transition, and it's to stop people defensively. I think become all-world defender Terrence Shannon, like he looked at points before his suspension. I think that's got to be his focus. I think that can really get him back involved.
No question. And, overall, the numbers this year, Illinois is 12 points better defensively with him on the floor. Their defensive rating's at 93 with him on the floor. With him off the floor, it's about a 103. If you have a 93 defensive rating with Terrence Shannon on the floor, that's going to win you a lot of games in Big Ten play. And that's adjusted, right? That's adjusted. That's not just raw points there, like for meaningless competition. That's an adjusted thing against high major competition. So you have got to have this ability where if Terrence is on the floor with if they go with the Terrence lineup with Marcus Damask and Coleman Hawkins, Quincy Guerrier, and Justin Harmon, that's in the lineup they've actually been closing with a lot lately. Yeah. You're probably your best perimeter defender is Terrence. Like, I liked putting him on Boo Buie, but he didn't win those matchups. And like, winning those one-on-one matchups have to be a huge part of it, because you're going to see some really, really talented guards coming up. You have Ohio State on Tuesday with a team that's super desperate, and you have to find a way to stop Bruce Thornton and Roddy Gale. You got Michigan State coming up next weekend, right? Like, you have to, who's guarding Tyson Walker and AJ Hogard, right? Michigan, you have is that game at home or at home? So then Doug McDaniel wouldn't play, right? I have to remember that. That's so weird, right? But like, you have Maryland coming up. Penn State will have multiple guards. Like, you have these things coming up, and then you look at in the big dance, like, you're going to see some really good guards, and that has to be a big part of it. If Terrence Shannon is the guy that wins those one-on-one matchups, like we saw earlier, like, he had times against Tyler Kolek where I thought he gave him a hard time, right? Like that. So it's not impossible for him to get back to that type of level. They need that in order for them to reach their ceiling. Because again, I still think that this team will win in March on defense. that's where I think that's where their path is. This offensive boom has really caught me a little bit by surprise a little bit, and it's kind of been a blessing in disguise a little bit because it's masked some of the defensive issues. I still think at its core, this group could be one of the best defenses in the country, and they need that if they really want to make a deep run.
I want to get off Illinois and the rest of the Big Ten here, but offensively, they continue to be top 10 in the country. It was an ugly game against Indiana, but that is kind of an outlier so far. What do you make of this offense, which is kind of a slower paced booty ball offense, but their efficiency is through the roof? Like, so what do you make of this offense? Is this sustainable? Does this win when you get to March?
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about the Illinois Penn State comps, but this team feels like it has some Houston in it with its just voracious offensive rebounding. Like they go at teams on the glass, and that ability to generate second possession, second chance opportunities feels like everything for this group. And I'm not super concerned about the numbers at the rim. I like the attempts at the rim. They're getting a lot of shots at the rim because of the offensive rebounds. I think water's going to find its level there a little bit with able to make shots there. Now, you're going to miss a lot of shots at the rim when you have a lot of offensive rebounded tips and stuff, all that. Like, that's just going to happen. But the pure amount of second chance opportunities that they're able to get is huge. Like, they're 16th right now in offensive efficiency. Now, Houston has a great offense, not because they take these amazing shots. They shoot a lot of jumpers. In fact, no team shoots more jumpers than Houston, right? Like they don't get a ton of shots at the rim, but they get so many opportunities because they're offensive rebounds. So I like what this group is going to mold into, because I still have some concerns about the shooting, but it's really minimized when you're the best offensive rebounding team in the country. And right now, Illinois is 16th in offensive rebounding. And that stuff matters. Like, let's pull up like the top offensive rebounding teams in the country. I don't think it's a surprising trend that, like, okay, Florida, they're second. That's a really good offense. St. John's is fourth. That's a good offense. Houston is fifth. Good offense. Seton Hall is sixth or seventh with one of the best offenses that they've had this year. Arizona is top 10 with a really good offense. Like, that's the key. Like, you don't see many great offensive rebounding teams. Exactly. UConn is up there. Purdue is up there. Baylor. You don't see a lot of teams that are really bad offensively that are also great on the offensive glass. And I feel like that's a part of this group that it seems like Brad has seen what Houston was and has started to mold into that a little bit too.
All right. Ohio State, Illinois plays there on Tuesday. Everything looked good coming into the new year for Ohio State after what was a really disappointing year. Nice finish in the Big Ten tournament for them. But man, January, they barely get by Rutgers at home, lose 3 straight, beat Penn State at home, and then lose back-to-back road games against Nebraska and Northwestern. Again, they're desperate for a win, just like they were at home against Illinois last year in the late in the season. But what has gone wrong for Ohio State here?
Yeah, this is a group. They're third right now among all high major teams in the fewest amount of shots at the rim. So again, it's a lot of jump shooting with this group, and it's really tough to win games when your best shooters aren't making shots, right? When you're taking a lot of tough shots and they're not making them. So earlier in the year, when they were winning, Dale Bonner over 40% from three, Roddy Gale over 40% from three, Bruce Thornton over 40%, and Jamison Battle. Right now, like, they've dropped off a cliff. Roddy Gale had a huge struggles. He's shooting 21% from three in Big Ten play. Bruce Thornton is at 27% from three. Dale Bonner feels like he hasn't made a shot in a month. Like, so it's really tough for this group to create and generate anything good offensively when their entire shot diet is jumpers and their best shooters aren't really making shots right now outside of Jamison Battle. So defensively, Felix Wapara is really, really good. And I think Roddy Gale is a good defender. But outside of that, they have really struggled to be more cohesive on that end. And I think a lot about, like, Kelvin Sampson has talked a lot about how the head coach has its most fingerprints on defense. And we've seen that, and Eric Spoelstra has talked about that as well, too. This group has way better defenders and should be a better defensive team than what they are. And that's where, if you're looking to move on from Chris Holtmann, that would be a case for me of, like, why that might not work out at the end of the year. Because this group has good individual defenders. Felix Wapara is a good individual defender. Gale and Thornton are good defenders. Evan Mahaffey was one of Penn State's best defenders last year and has been a good defender at times. Jamison Battle has really good positional size. This group should not be as bad as they are defensively. And that's where I feel like part of it is some of those struggles. They're just not able to generate a lot of easy buckets. But again, they're talented shot makers. When they make shots and Jamison Battle is getting free and Bruce Thornton and Roddy Gale are playing with confidence, that's a really talented team. They have no business, finishing under 500 in this Big Ten, and that's what they're kind of on pace for.
Is it just shut down Jamison Battle for Illinois? Is that the key, running him off the 3-point line?
I think so, but a lot of his shots are really created by other guys. It's really the Bruce Thornton drives that are so important. Roddy Gale's ability to mismatch Hunt a little bit. Illinois matches up very well with them, to be honest, because Illinois' defense really wants to force you into taking tough twos. And Ohio State will kind of like buy right into that. Like they will take a lot of contested jumpers. So if you're able to beat them on the glass and force those shots and keep Jamison Battle from getting free, I think you're in good position to do well, right, against this matchup, because you have, again, a lot of positional size. You're throwing, a 6'6" Ty Rodgers onto Bruce Thornton. I would guess that Terrence gets the Roddy Gale assignment, right? You have a lot of those opportunities, but they're going to try to play a little bit like what you do. I think the jury is out on Illinois. Like, hey, when Luke Goody's on the floor, drive him, go after him in one-on-one situations. When Marcus Damascus is on the floor, like Marcus has to take such a huge role offensively. Teams are going to continue to go after him defensively to try to wear him down. And part of me wonders if that's part of the turnover rate that started to happen, just because he's getting gone at a lot defensively. And he's a good defender, but when you're getting going at like constantly, and then it's like, hey, now you have the ball and it's time for you to do booty ball offense on the other side. Like that's a lot of effort and stress. 37 minutes.
Yeah,
correct. Absolutely. That's a tough job. And so I feel like those guys will be tested by that group. But if you're able to, really get your chest in front of them and cut off those driving lanes and force them to take those tough twos, I think you feel pretty good about your chances, because this Ohio State group just hasn't made shots for a while.
Chris Holtmann started his Ohio State career 5 straight 21 seasons, 4 of the 5 seasons in the top 5 of the Big Ten. The last few years, he has gone 8-21 in the Big Ten. Is he on the hottest seat in the Big Ten right now?
Yeah, I think he is. And part of it is because Mike Woodson at Indiana, former player there. I think you get a little bit of a longer leash after making the NCAA tournament. Juwan Howard at Michigan, you win the national championship in football, kind of former player, have a little bit of a longer leash there. Holtmann, Ohio State has a new athletic director coming in. I feel like all the writing is on the wall that, this was kind of like, you were kind of billed like last year was an outlier. This year will be different. And unfortunately, Ohio State's following a lot of the same script, right? They were horrible in January last year, and they've been horrible in January again this year, just inexcusable, to be honest. So he is on the hottest seat in the Big Ten. And, Ohio State also has to look at that coaching carousel. There's some really good names that could potentially be up for bid, like could look for a great job. And Ohio State has a lot of NIL money. They have great resources there. It's one of the best jobs in the Big Ten, probably a top 25, 30 job nationally, maybe for college basketball. And, can you make a run at Dusty May? Can you make a run at Indiana State's star coach? Could you maybe poach Porter Moser? Could you go, hey, does Mick Cronin want to leave UCLA? Like, does Eric Musselman want to get out of Arkansas? Like, there's a lot of bigger opportunities, and Holtmann just hasn't helped himself. Like, he really hasn't. Like I said earlier, this group should be much better defensively. And last I checked, they were, flirting with the top 100, outside the top 100 defensively. And that just falls on him right now. And record in close games. That didn't used to be a problem early in his career, and it has been lately.
You mentioned Dusty May, and he's a former Indiana manager, right? So,
yes.
So, like, I sit there and I go, Mike Woodson's only in his 3rd year. I don't think Indiana wants to make that big of a change, but he's 65 years old. I don't think this is going as well as they wanted to. So I just sit there and go, is Indiana really going to let like a Dusty May go to Ohio State or Michigan? Does that happen? Because, I mean, this is roster building malpractice, what Mike Woodson has done this year, because their front court, as we saw in Champaign, is good enough to win, but the backcourt, I mean, 0 3-pointers made, was just a terrible stat for him, and we've all seen this coming. So if they miss the tournament, like, what do you think happens there with Indiana? 3 years in, I don't know if they make a change that quick. Does Woodson just retire off into the sunset or whatever it is? But this isn't working as well as they wanted it to.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't. I don't think he's going to get fired or anything. I think it's kind of up to him on what he wants to do. Now, granted, they did try for Dalton Knecht. They were really involved with him, and then he went to Tennessee and kind of was like, I'm good on Indiana, right? Like, Tennessee was his number one from that point, and I don't think he even visited Indiana after he went to that Tennessee visit. So they tried to upgrade this thing. There's been some talk in the streets that, portal guards were scared of going to Indiana because of Xavier Johnson and Trey Galloway, which I think is really weird, because if you flip on the tape, could pretty much see that you're probably a little bit more talented than those two guys. So I don't know if I
he's
fully buy that.
around 500 in the Big Ten. They've done to back-to-back NCAA tournaments. They won a game last year. So I don't think there's like a ton of pressure on him. Is he the guy at 65 years old, given what else I can get? Yeah.
And, I do think that factoring next year, they have 5-star Liam McNeely on the way, who's arguably one of the best shooters in the class. So you're going to fix, you'd think, if that freshman can come in and do that, you could think that. But yeah, it felt like they tried to manage Mackenzie McBacco at the 3, and that necessarily hasn't gone very well. Even when Kalel Ware's been out, I've been really wanting them to play McBacco at the 4, Renew at the 5, and then get CJ Gunn on the floor, try to play 3 guards that way, try to generate a little bit more spacing. But it feels like Woodson just doesn't want to do that, and I'm not necessarily sure why. So it's a little bit frustrating watching this group on a night-to-night basis because they do have a lot of talent, but it feels like the roster construction has certainly hampered its ceiling. And there were a lot of calls early in the preseason that, hey, Indiana's super underranked and we're not giving them a lot of respect and everything. But we might have given them too much respect by picking them 6th, right? Like, because it feels like this group's ceiling might be 6th in the Big Ten.
Michigan has lost 8 of 9.
It's a disaster.
It's
as bad as it's gotten.
Is there any way he comes back? Like, I don't know how you bring him back. Besides, he brought the Fab Five back to the stadium for a night.
I mean, I read the Brendan Quinn piece on The Athletic, and they're not convinced that they're going to get rid of him after the season. Like, I don't know.
Only way I think you can do that is if they get to like 7 Big Ten wins, 8 Big Ten wins, and just be like, all right, we just need a roster reset again. I don't think they're getting there. This team just looks like it's done.
They have completely quit. They've quit. And it's really, I mean, the Ohio State game, they find a way to grind that one out. And you're wondering, is this a sign of life? But just the vibes that that group have been off, and it's so weird. Like right at the beginning of the year, we're like, man, did we overlook Michigan, right? They start 3-0. They beat St. John's at MSG, start to play really well. And then just the wheels have completely fallen off that train. And, I think from the outside perspective, I think that they would be well suited to look for a change and try to change things up a little bit because this feels pretty broken. But I could also see them going, hey, like we tried to upgrade this roster with Caleb Love. And if we had gotten Caleb Love, this would be different. Hey, we tried a couple years ago. We almost got Terrence Shannon Jr. Like things would have been different with that. Like I also look at like some of the guys that went pro, they have gotten Kobe Buffkin back for another year? Like they've recruited at a high level. They have another top 10 point guard coming in next year in the class. Like maybe you could talk yourself into like just kind of a little bit unlucky, but it feels like this group is
I get all of that, Isaac. Like kudos to him for recruiting talent that the NBA wants sooner than later. And I know they probably should have gotten Terrence Shannon. They felt like they should have gotten Caleb Love. At the same time, are we sure they would have been good with those guys? Because how does last year's team of Hunter Dickinson, Kobe Buffkin, Jett Howard not make the NCAA tournament? How does this team with talent win 4 of 17 games? Like that's my problem. Is like, listen, you can have some down years, you get some bad breaks, that happens. You can say the same thing with like Brad Underwood with our Ray J. Dennis, right? Like they went all in on him. It didn't work out. Maybe that keeps them from being elite, but they're still a good team. Like Michigan, the last 2 years is just completely underachieved, even with some of those misses.
Yeah, and Hunter Dickinson, I think it's pretty clear he made the right decision to leave, and so like when maybe Kobe Buffkin made the right decision to leave, like some of these guys have made decisions that have impacted that group and it's worked out better for them than it has for Michigan. And so it just feels like the program's in disarray, and it really shouldn't be like this because it wasn't that long ago where Michigan was the class of the Big Ten and one of the better teams in the country, and the program was headed in the right direction. I'm just surprised by how quickly it's fallen off like this. Like if you would have said that Juwan Howard experience or the experiment didn't work at Michigan, I would understand that. But to how it's been like this, I don't think I saw something like this coming because this group doesn't look like it. I mean, this group looks like it's ready to click fast forward to the end of the year and be done with it. Like they have not shown any signs of like, hey, let's turn this around at all.
And I just think that's hard to get back. Like even with some roster reset, I think that's hard to come back from. All right. On the flip side, coach of the year in the Big Ten. Is it Greg Gard again? Or Chris Collins again?
Yeah, I think that's where we're kind of trending to. I think Brad Underwood certainly would have a case if you start to get this group together and potentially get to, 15-5 in the Big Ten. Maybe they finish second, but I think the job that Greg Gard has done is really, really tremendous. There were a lot of signs with that group that, teams were trying to really poach them in the portal. There were a lot of heat around, hey, is Chucky Hepburn going to enter the portal? Like, hey, could Tyler Wall not come back? Like all of these different situations. Greg Gard kept that group together, and he did a really nice job of getting guys to buy into different roles. Obviously, the AJ Storr thing is different, but Chucky Hepburn's usage rate has went from 25% last year to 15% this year, and he's totally fine with it. Like he's totally fine taking 4 or 5 shots a game and being that type of guy for them, and that sets the table. I think he's just done a really good job because early in the year, they looked like in a completely different tier, right? Like they lose to Tennessee at home by 10. They go on the road and get destroyed by Providence. They go to Arizona and get run by 25. But this group has really started to mold together. Now, I don't think they're like invincible. This is not an invincible roster, invincible that's going to just go on this warpath through the Big Ten. But Greg Gard deserves a lot of credit for keeping this roster in place, finding the right pieces, changing. He's changed a lot of what they've done to play with a little bit more tempo in the half court at times and really accentuate what they do well. Like that's another team that saw what they were on the offensive glass and was like, this isn't good enough. We got to get more offensive rebounds. And so that's been a big part of their, top 5 offense so far this year as well. So he's done a great job there, but it's open because I think Matt Painter's done a good job too. I think Chris Collins has done a great job. And if Brad Underwood gets this group to 15-5 in the Big Ten and they're, first or get a share or tied for second, like he also has a really deserving case as well for Coach of the Year.
If you had to put your money on who wins the Big Ten, Wisconsin or Purdue? I
still think it's Purdue. I think they're too consistent. Even their bad games, like they did not look great on Sunday against Rutgers, and lot wasn't going right for them, and they just still find a way to win by 8 on the road. Like that's just kind of what they do. So you kind of look at their schedule coming up. They get Northwestern at home. That's big. And then on the road at Wisconsin, that feels like a huge one. We have 2 more tilts there, Wisconsin and Purdue. And if Purdue can find a way to go 2-0 in those things, that obviously changes it. But even if they just get one of those things, I think they're going to be set up because we've seen this Wisconsin team, they're vulnerable. Like they nearly lost on the road at Minnesota. They already did lose on the road to Penn State. And they have some pretty tough games coming up too, right? Like you have on the road at Iowa, you play on the road at Indiana, on the road at Purdue. Like Michigan and Rutgers are teams that like we'll see what they do. On the road at Nebraska is another tough one for them coming up this week. So I just feel like Wisconsin has a few more holes in their game. I feel like Purdue is just too invincible. Like the Purdue's A game is better than Wisconsin's A game. So I'm going to bank with Purdue right now.
All right. I think we all believe that Illinois, Purdue, Wisconsin are NCAA tournament locks. Michigan State, like I think right now is a lock because the metrics love them. They have good wins over Baylor, Butler. Indiana State is a good win for them. Beating Maryland on the road is a pretty solid win for them. So they still got some work to do, but I think they're probably going to get in. I think Northwestern is probably getting closer to that with their big wins at home. So I don't love them in this group, but more confident to make the tournament. Northwestern, or let's just go Nebraska or Iowa, because I feel like Northwestern's going to get in the tournament.
Yeah, I'm with you. Northwestern feels like that 9 seed that plays a really good 8 seed and wins, and then somehow is playing North Carolina in that round of 32 game, and it's a close game at the under 4 timeout because Boo's awesome, right? Yes,
Boo that's right now. I mean, if it weren't for Edey, he might be the Big Ten Player of the Year.
He's phenomenal. Sorry, side note, but like, has anyone like changed your mind more than Boo Buie? Like, I was anti-Boo for a few years, and now I love that dude.
I was out on underclassmen Boo Buie. Like, just the usage and efficiency was atrocious. But man, like 5 years, it pays off when you're just get old. 5 years, you learn how to win, and he's just as clutch as they come. Like he made a couple buzzer beaters, so everyone thought he was great as an underclassman, but. He's turned into one heck of a player. I agree with you. I've done a 180 on him.
Yeah, he's awesome. But to answer your question, I do think it's still Nebraska for me. Iowa early in the year was really frustrating, but they've started to really play better. And part of it was they started playing the freshmen, which was really encouraging for me. Like they played Owen Freeman more. They've really dialed up the extra minutes for Brock Harding. They've played Ben Creaky at the 4 with Freeman, and that's been a great thing for them. So I do think that they're working their way closer to the bubble, but I think Nebraska, if the season ended today, I don't think Nebraska's in, but they have a pretty good chance of working their way onto the right side. I like this group. I like the old veterans that they've gotten, all from winning programs. Bryce Williams, Rink Mast, they both won a ton. Josiah Alick won a ton, and they've really brought that in there, and they're going to be really good at home. But again, it feels like this Wisconsin game for them on Thursday.
It's a Big Ten case for them.
Yeah, like that's a huge one. Like this next group, like their next 3 games, I think we'll know if Nebraska's going to make the tournament by their next 3 games, because they get Wisconsin at home, and then they go on the road at Illinois and at Northwestern. If they win 2 out of 3, they're in, because I think all 3 of those are going to be like quad 1 games. So that it feels like everything rides on this, and I think they know that too, because Juwan Gary had a calf strain, and they did not play him right away. I think he could have played this week at Maryland. They chose not to. So they're trying to get him fully healthy, because I think they know that these 3 games are huge. And your boy Keisei Tominaga has obviously been shooting the heck out of it from 3, but Mast and Williams are real difference makers. I love how connected that group is too. You've seen them have some games where they're just not, shots don't go in. Sometimes the defense isn't amazing. Sometimes they're a little bit limited when they have to play Josiah Alick a ton, because he's not really a shooter. But that's a group that they're really connected. And I feel like Fred Hoiberg's done a really nice job with that team, because, that they could have the wheels could have easily fallen off for them early in the year, and they just refused to give in. And I respect that a lot about them.
I'm sorry, Illinois fans. I know you don't like this, but I am very excited to see Keisei Tominaga in person on Sunday at State Farm Center. We just had a Big Ten hot seat conversation. We didn't talk about Ben Johnson, by the way.
Yeah. So how do we talk about this? All right. So early in the year, I was pretty down on Minnesota, and then they played a little bit better against Missouri, and you're like, they have a chance, and then they blew that game, and then the San Francisco game happens, Ohio State happens. It's like, okay, same script, like we know how this is going to go. And then they started figuring out a little bit. They start 3-1, and they're 12-3 overall, and start to play a little bit better. So I think from the outside, have just assumed that Ben Johnson's gone. And I think internally, from people around that program, that hasn't necessarily been the case. So how do we, this dichotomy between like, hey, Minnesota is going to have an opening. They got some teams there that make a lot of sense. There's some programs, the coaches there that make a lot of sense to fill that void. I don't know if that's necessarily the case if they find a way to get to 8 or 9 Big Ten wins.
That's key.
And that's not impossible.
It's going to be hard, though. Their schedule will get really, really tough here. They got to beat Rutgers and Penn State. They got to find a way to protect home court, whether it's Indiana late in the season, Ohio State coming to them. There's not a lot of easy wins left on their schedule, but I'll give them this. Like, I thought it could have been a Michigan kind of look for them. I thought the team could have really just folded at some point during the season, and they haven't. They lost 4 straight, but they come back, beat Penn State, almost beat Wisconsin at home. They're plucky, man. They play hard for them. So, like, that's a low bar. But I had questions about whether that would happen. So year 3 of Ben Johnson, I think he's added some players, developed some players. Like Hawkins has been really, really good for them. Pharrell Payne has really stepped up as a sophomore, big man. Cam Christie does some things as a freshman every once in a while I like. So they're playing for him. And that's a number one thing you want to see as an AD after 2 terrible first seasons is, are these guys playing hard? Are they giving themselves a chance to win games? And they are. And he's developing some talent.
And their process is really good. I think he like Brad Underwood has decided that we're going all in on limiting threes. Like that's our identity defensively is you're not going to get threes. They did a great job on Keisei Tominaga early in the year. So they've had some hiccups with their transition defense. It's a younger team, new group, like some of their issues there. But he's done a nice job with their process, I think. And they're not poorly coached. I don't think they have the most talent in the Big Ten, but they're not poorly coached. And I like the process that they're kind of going into every game with, and we'll see if it pays off in the long run.
If they don't play on Wednesday of the Big Ten tournament, I think Ben Johnson is for sure back for a 4th year. Like that'd be a pretty big accomplishment for a team that I think was unanimously picked last. I mean, Penn State might have gotten a few votes for last, but they were definitely bottom 2 in the projections.
Absolutely. And he's done actually a decent job in the portal too. Like I think a lot of people like were a little bit iffy on Elijah Hawkins, but Hawkins was a really nice get for them. And then the other guy, Mike Mitchell out of Pepperdine, has been a pretty nice get for them as well too. And you look at this group, Dawson Garcia could come back if he wants. Hawkins could come back. Pharrell Payne could come back. Like you could have a lot of cohesiveness where you get 7 rotation players back next year. That might be the process for Ben Johnson to earn a 4th year.
Last one for you, because I think it's the one team we haven't mentioned. Is there a bounce back here for Maryland? Like they've won 4 of 6. They're 5-5 in the Big Ten. Boy, they got talent. Jameer Young's a top 3 player, likely in the Big Ten. Julian Reese is a load. You know, obviously not a lot of depth there, but can Maryland make a run at a bid here?
Man, it's going to be tight, but I don't think it's impossible. I think Jameer has really put the program on his back. Like, hey, we're just not going to go out like this. We will not do this. And so he's been awesome for them. But the other key thing for them, too, is they've started to increase Jahari Long's minutes a little bit as a guy off the bench who could make shots for them. I think he's hit multiple threes in 3 straight games. And the bar for them is just so low. Just make a couple shots from downtown. And it feels like Maryland's offense looks like night and day better. And so you kind of look at their resume. They really don't have horrible losses. Now UAB and Davidson aren't great, but they're not, they're not like program like they're not Chicago State losses like that Northwestern has on its resume. So their margin for error is super thin moving forward. But I do think they do control their own fate because Jameer is talented enough to win a game by himself. Dante Scott has started to hit shots again. If Jamie Kaiser can continue to make shots and Jahari Long is making shots, like I feel like the defense is going to be something that travels on a night-to-night basis. It's like, can they get to 7 threes a night? That's like the number I keep thinking about. Can they make 7 shots from downtown a night? If they do, they could work that way. And if you're an Illinois fan, you're going, hey, like you can win as many games as you want. You can win as many games as you want to make that home loss not look quite as an outlier.
Yeah, and they got 3, I think, really significant opportunities left at Wisconsin, home against Illinois. We know they've owned Illinois, and then at Michigan State. If they can get 2 of those, I think they're feeling a lot better because I do think they'll beat up on the bottom of the Big Ten just because they got more talent than a lot of those teams. So it'd be a pretty big disappointment if they don't make the tournament with this, starting lineup that they have, Isaac. But they got some work to do.
Yeah, Bart Torvik gives them a 4% chance of getting in right now. So It's thin, but it's not impossible. And you just got to get hot. And with this group, when you play defense like this and when you play at the tempo they have, it's going to be a grimy 2-possession game with 5 minutes to go, and they're going to find a way to win. That feels like their last month has been 2-possession game with 5 minutes to go, and we're going to win half of them and we're going to lose half of them. Now they got to try to win like 70% of those moving out.
When you got Jameer Young, you might have a chance. All right, Isaac Trotter, this was awesome, man. Thanks for getting us caught up to speed on everything in the Big Ten. Appreciate it, man.
Thanks for having me.